Welcome back to Talk Mental Health with Logan Noon. I apologize for taking a month off since my last post, but I promise you the wait is going to be well worth it. I'm excited for today's episode. It's a special episode. This is like 2 years in the making with my close friend Mehalate. We are going to be talking about how essentially ethnicity and mental health are related. This story is going to be from a person who I have a great deal of respect for, who is a person of color who goes to medical school. She's a medical classmate of mine. And, a majority of my school is not people of color. So it's a really interesting conversation, and also how ethnicity relates to mental health. So that break I took away from you guys was because I was on my psychiatry rotation. So really on my psychiatry rotation, I'm excited to kind of have a podcast entirely related to that experience. It was a tremendous experience for me. It reassured me that psychiatry is really the passion for me, where I think I'm going to be best fit to be a physician. I really tried to go above and beyond on that rotation and try my best, and that's why simply I was not able to produce episodes in a timely fashion during that time period. I hope to be better in these future rotations. Please know I'm trying my best. But with lo and behold, here we are, the episode with my great friend Mehalate. I think you're going to like it. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a cool conversation because as much as I talk about mental health, this is an area of mental health that I certainly don't talk about because I simply don't know how. I don't have experiences in this subject matter. So what we're going to be talking about today is essentially the relationship between ethnicity, race, being a person of color, and mental health, and how they interplay, how they affect one another, and how someone like me, white boy from Connecticut, can just be better well-versed in this subject when I'm a future physician and I'm going to be seeing patients of all races and ethnicities, how I can better relate and help out these patients. So, Mehalate, why don't you at least, before we get started, tell the listeners, who you are, where you're even talking to me from.
Okay, hey everyone. My name is Mehalate again. I am a third-year medical school student at PNWU. I am originally from Georgia and moved all the way to Washington just for shits and giggles. And then my family's actually from Ethiopia, so I am a first-generation Ethiopian.
Okay.
Here.
There we go.
Yeah. And right now I'm talking from Atlanta, Georgia.
Back home in good old Atlanta, Georgia. So, I guess before we even dive into this, I guess I'm making some assumptions here. You identify yourself as a black woman, but I guess really, how do you define yourself? Is it I'm a black woman, I'm an African American woman? How is this race, ethnicity? I still to this day, I guess, don't really understand the differences.
Okay. I am a black woman. That's what I identify as. My ethnicity, I am Ethiopian American. So that's my African American and more of a specific subset, I guess. And a lot of people will identify with, if they do know their background, they would say I am a Nigerian American or Ghanaian American or etc. Okay. But I am Ethiopian American. Yeah.
Okay. And, I guess let's just kind of talk then about, being a person of color, but, growing up in Georgia, I guess certain parts of Georgia are probably much more communities of color than others. So, what was your community like growing up?
Right. So I actually went to a Catholic high school, so I was at a predominantly white institution there. I was one of 7 black students of a class of 52.
Okay.
It was shocking because I came from an elementary school. I moved there to that Catholic high school from 8th grade on. So I came from an elementary and middle school of a predominantly black school. And that was in my more local community. So it was a huge culture shock from moving from a predominantly black school to a predominantly white school. And it did make me like change my mannerisms, change my habits. And I just like mimicked what everyone else did so I can fit in. And that was just
Hmm.
me as a young student.
And how
Um,
old were you, I guess, then at that transition?
oh God.
Was it high school?
Oh, no, it was eighth grade when I moved.
Oh, okay. Okay. So even
I don't
so
know
though,
what age
I
they
just
are.
finished my peds rotation. And so, as
Yeah.
if being a 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl isn't awkward enough, you're making this
Right.
strange transition from a community where, I'm assuming you probably felt a little bit more comfortable, and at least because
Yeah.
your peers,
Looked like
quite
me.
simply, yeah, looked like you. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and then you get put in this environment where it's completely opposite. So, I guess
Yeah.
right from the very get-go, like what was your really first challenge that you noticed, like how your skin color impacted your mental health?
Well, I just knew I always felt different and I always knew that eyes were always on me. So it really raised my anxiety and it made me think that I had so much pressure to perform well, which really just carried out throughout my time even now sometimes um, where I just feel like I know that all eyes are on me, so I have to perform really well, or else they're going to think that every other black person that comes in after me is going to perform just as terrible if I did perform terrible or just as well. I want them to have the positive outlook on people that look like me so that it's not harder for them too. Yeah.
So,
So anxiety was definitely a huge thing when I was growing up too. So
even prior to that school?
yeah, only because I also felt like I didn't. I was called and known as like the Oreo because I still talked really proper or white as you would say. I'm putting quotations around
Mhm.
that, um, and so I fit in. My best friend was white. My like person that I like talked to all the time was white. I did have a couple black friends, but like I was also always known or always seen as the white black girl in
Okay.
my schools prior to my Catholic high school experience. And then when I got to high school, I was like, wow, it's completely different. Now I am the black girl, or I'm one of the black girls, and we're just known and
Oh,
coupled together. Does that make sense?
that's very interesting cuz it's like
Yeah.
you
So it was
always sort of felt like you were this, you didn't
other.
exactly fit, so when you were
Yeah.
in maybe a black community setting, everyone, oh, that's I don't what it, like however you described it, the Oreo or
Yeah. It
whatever.
was. We're an
And
Oreo.
then
Yeah.
you get in a community where it's primarily Caucasian people, and it's, oh, nope, she's the black girl, and
Right.
that must have been, I can imagine that being just incredibly challenging. So I guess,
Yeah.
even at a young age, like how did you cope, and what did you talk to anybody, or did you kind of, was this all pent up frustration?
No. I knew that. Well, my image of like mental health and stuff, in the black community, it's not seen as something that is heard of. It's not seen as something that is positive. You're either crazy or you're not type thing, or you're healthy or you're not. So you don't really talk about mental health. Even in my family now, if I were to ever say like, oh, I'm depressed or oh, I have anxiety, they'd be like, just pray about it and you'll be fine. And that's
Okay.
very similar to a lot of other people that would bring up any type of mental health issue with their parents or any other family member because it's not seen as something that takes prevalence like a real like medical health condition type thing.
Okay.
So I personally didn't talk to anybody, and it just festered. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, were you having like quote unquote panic attacks, or was it kind of this constant state of anxiety or like social isolation? Like, what, I guess, can you paint a picture for what your life was like around, let's say, 13 years old, like that awkward transition?
yeah, I think really what happened was it just took a huge chunk out of my self confidence. I knew that my anxiety was like so high that it was like this like dark glooming cloud over me. But then I knew that couldn't show my real self ever because that wouldn't fit into the social construct at that time. So whether that was in elementary school or that was in high school where I had these two different, very different environments, I would always feel like I can't show my full self or else I won't be accepted.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a
Yeah.
terrible way to
Yeah.
live. And so, I mean, I guess you were having anxiety, and like, how did this then affect you socially? Like, were you capable of making friends at that point?
Yes. I was capable of making friends. Were they true friendships? No, I don't talk to anybody from high school at all. Maybe one person, two people. Um, that's pretty much it. Everyone else, I don't really talk to at all. But I definitely, looking back at it now, see that I was very outgoing for the sake of like it was like a survival tactic. Like
Yeah.
I had to put myself out there in order for me to survive in that environment and like still be seen and still be recognized as a person. Like I didn't want to feel invisible. And I think that's how I felt when I was younger. And so I wanted to, since I have this brand new slate at this Catholic school, like let me make this a completely different experience for me. So I was like overly like, hey, let's do this. Let's do this. Let me go to every sporting event. Let me be in every sport and every club and be presidents of this, and that. And it's funny how I say that it was a huge shot at my confidence, and I did all these things so scared in all of those things because I knew that I had to be on at all times, and that was petrifying for me.
Yeah. And well, it really kind of seems like a lot of this
Yeah.
stemmed, you know, at least in the Catholic school, high school experience, like you mentioned, you felt you had pressure on you, and it was a Catholic school, so I imagine it was a private school, right? And like it was a
Yeah.
good school, right? And
Right.
so all high school students, I guess, have pressure on them. SATs are starting, ACTs, whatever it may be. But you felt, and you've disclosed to me that you felt additional pressure. So why do you think you felt additional pressure on yourself in comparison to one of your white classmates?
Well, like I said, I wanted to make sure that no one else had this bad perception of Black students in general. I wanted to prove my position or my spot at that school. I was a scholarship kid, so, and people could tell, I guess. I didn't have designer clothing. I didn't have, like, my family wasn't known within the community, so they knew I wasn't from the area, which means I wasn't a rich person. And
No.
so in that case, I was like, well, just because I'm a scholarship kid doesn't mean I'm not as smart and can't get into the same colleges as all these other people that are here. So I wanted to make sure that I could prove my position. And I mean, obviously, that's huge ego. Oh, yeah, that was all my ego right there. But it was also like this pitting fear of if I didn't perform well, I know that every other Black girl that comes in behind me, it's going to look down or it's going to look bad for them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, it just makes me think about my high school experience because, I grew up in, I mean, I went to a public school, but quite frankly, it seemed like probably the same demographic of what you experienced at that Christian school. It
Yeah.
was, I don't even think we had 7 Black kids, to be honest. It was really probably 95% Caucasian. And I still viewed high school as awkward and challenging, and I had periods of anxiety and I didn't like it, and I still had that pent up emotion. So I guess though what I'm trying to get at is how would you sort of try to educate someone like me who is, like I said, very naive in this area, like, okay, so being a person of color, like a Black person, maybe even outside of just we've continued to talk about school, like how does that impact your mental health? And I guess kind of like a good suggestion would be, easiest thing that comes to mind, it's like when you get pulled over by the police or something like that, or
Yeah.
when you find yourself I don't know, in a mall or any other kind of social situations, like what are things that you've experienced that I just probably don't even think about?
I would say that I become super aware of everyone around me. Again, I know that I always feel that all eyes are on me, and that's just think of having stage fright all the time. And that's really how it feels. Like you are in front of 300 people doing this speech. If you're public speaking, if that's the thing that you fear most, like think of all eyes on you, and that's how I feel in any situation where I feel like I'm or like I where I am the minority. Um, as far as seeing the police or being pulled over, I get petrified. I have panic attacks. I am sweating. I am damn near in tears. Um, it's just, especially how the news is today, like you never know how the interaction can go, and you never know what they can just pull or say. And so every time I try my hardest not to get pulled over in general, because I don't know how to recoup either. So I'm literally shaking for the rest of my journey to wherever I'm going until I sit down again, because it is such a petrifying experience. Um, Talking to a cop, dealing with a cop, it's just very intimidating. And that's really like, even talking about cops and like, I remember I got pulled over in Yakima one time and I freaked out. Like I was so scared. I had one of my classmates holding my hand the entire time because I was freaking out.
Hmm.
And it was dark, it was at night, and I accidentally like ran a yellow, which what?
Yeah.
And it was just so petrifying. And I remember that entire night I couldn't stop thinking about it because it could have gone a completely different way if I didn't have somebody else in the car, or I don't know. But it's just like this daunting fear. Like again, I want to keep bringing up this like this cloud of anxiety that's always just looming, because any situation in any like setting can flip so quickly just because of the color of my skin. And it's crazy because it's something that I can't change. So it's like I don't know how to respond half the time. And then that like, also revs up my anxiety because I'm like, I don't even know what to say. And I know if I come off angry, it's going to come off as my angry black woman, and I'm going to become aggressive and combative. And then that's going to make my case worse. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
then I guess what my question is just kind of like what's the evolution of this feeling been? Because we've talked about high school, and then you touched on this experience in Yakima, which for the listeners is where me and Mehalate spent our first 2 years of medical school. And so obviously years have gone by, and I'm sure you've developed some coping mechanisms that are healthy, but obviously there's still some things that are challenging in your life. So I guess let's
Yeah.
quickly highlight kind of you. It seems like you went to kind of varying environments as you kind of entered your 20s, right? So you went to Georgia University, which
Yep.
is massive
It's also a
university.
PWI,
What
by
was
the
that?
way. It's also a PWI, predominantly white institution.
Georgia is?
Yes.
Oh, I
It is 7% black or African American, and 6% of that are athletes. 1% are there for academics.
yeah. Wow. And then that just kind of even highlights just like my own biases, because I don't know much about Georgia. I've never actually even been to Georgia. Maybe I flew into the airport once.
Yeah.
But I watch sports, right? And
Yeah.
so I see the Georgia football team, which is
Yeah. All
primarily,
black.
yeah, individuals of black.
Yeah.
So I just made the assumption that, oh, I bet the school is a majority black. Like they kind of just probably look like their football team. So I mean, geez, I feel like a moron now talking to you. I just kind of made that own assumption just by watching ESPN highlights kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it seems like
Yeah,
you've
no, that
always
was
sort of been in this kind of environment where I don't know and I'm kind of talking out of my ass, of course, but like, what percentage of America does identify as black? Like, I don't know. What is it? 13%, 15%? I don't really know. But either way, whatever that number is, the social situations you primarily found yourself in, and we're talking probably mostly school institutions, high school, undergraduate school, and then of course medical school, you were the odd person out. You were that.
Yeah.
The representation of those schools was significantly lower than the actual population of African American people in society. So I guess, how have you learned to handle these sort of situations, and how would you advise people in similar situations to you that are maybe younger, like, hey, this is what I learned, these are things that I learned to cope by, and then this is how I kind of educate my dumbass white friend Logan Noon from Connecticut, kind of thing. So sorry that was like a 3-minute long question, but hopefully you can hit all 30 things I just highlighted.
Okay. So the way mostly I coped with any type of, like, if I had a racist encounter or anything I've heard was going on in school, or whether it was in the community or anything like that, I really tune into my community where I'll focus really on my experience at University of Georgia. We had a community called BUGA, which is Black UGA. And so it was all of these students that were Black. Just, we all always partied together. During the day, we had this thing called Tate Time, where in the middle of the day, we go to the student center and just talk and, like, just really be able to be with each other and feel like we belong in a spot or in a place at the school. And so if I ever felt any kind of anxiety or any type of, like, ill feelings towards the other students in my school, I could confide in them and, like, just talk it out and really have that conversation one-on-one and get it off my chest. And that was my biggest way of getting that anxiety out. And it really built that sense of community within BUGA. And I am forever grateful to every single person in that community. And we're all still friends and still continue to reach out today. When it came to high school, there wasn't many of us.
There was no BUGA.
And we were, there was no BUGA at all, definitely. And we were all trying to do the same thing. We were trying to, for lack of a better word, assimilate to the environment that we had, because we all had that same fear of, well, we have to prove our spot here, and two, we've got to just survive. Like, so we need to act right, and everything will smooth sail until graduation, and we will be out of here forever. So it wasn't until after college, when I made the correct connections and, like, made and found my community, that I really, like, felt comfortable being the only Black girl in a class or the only Black girl in a room or anything like that. Because you do become hyper aware regardless of what age you are, what setting you are. But just calming that anxiety down, knowing that you have, like, a support system, it doesn't relinquish it completely, but definitely helps you ease your way into that whole situation.
So, though, that makes me kind of challenge you in the fact that, okay, yeah, it's easy to have that kind of community when you find yourself at Georgia, which, like you said, is only, I don't know, what, 6% or whatever,
7%
people
roughly.
of color, but it's a massive institution. So that's still, I don't know how many people were in BUGA, but what, 100 at least?
It was a lot. It was a lot of us still.
Yeah. So, let's now transition into Pacific Northwest University, or in just kind of, we can even talk medical school in general. No medical school, I think we have a class of 140 students, and I think most classes are in that general vicinity, maybe a little bit bigger, but some even a little bit smaller. So, I think I'm a member of some equivalent of BUGA on campus, just because I do want to show my support in any way that I can. But it's much, much, much smaller, right? So
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah.
then find that sense of community when it's no longer this big pool? It's a much, much smaller.
Yeah. So, just by the way, the community that Logan's talking about for all of our listeners
Hmm.
is SNMA, which is the Student National Medical Association. There you go, which is the Black student equivalent of the AMA. Um, and unfortunately, since there's only three of us in our current class, I didn't really feel included in the class. I peers do not get angry at me. Um, did not feel any type of inclusion. I didn't really like the class first year. It was hard for me to connect with anyone. So every time I came home like I did go to parties, of course, and like gatherings or whatever. But that was my way of trying to be overtly outgoing in order for people to still recognize that, hey, I exist. Like there's still three Black girls in our class. Like please remember that there's diversity and we should be included in everything, and even social encounters and stuff like that, so we can still build that inclusivity and that diversity, sense within the student body as a social, crew,
Yeah.
but first year I did have a group of friends. We were really cool, got very close, especially because of our past master's program and stuff. But I didn't feel that inclusion that I knew I was missing that I
Hmm.
had in undergrad. And so a lot of the times I found myself just going straight home or straight to our local coffee shop and just studying by myself and really isolating myself, only because I just didn't feel comfortable. And I didn't make the effort to get to know the other two Black girls in our class. And that was my mistake. I would have loved to because we are very close now. It took until second year for us to really like make that connection and really get to know each other. But first year was just hell. But
Yeah.
now that I've have them in my corner, and I know that if anything were to happen, or if any sideways comments were to be said within lecture or within an email, like we all recognize it. We're all like side eyeing or having a conversation. Is everyone good? Do we need to talk about this? It's crazy because we had that one incident in class and we all texted each other at the exact same time when that incident occurred, and it was great because I knew that I wasn't feeling alone when I'm gonna guess we're gonna talk about this
It's whatever you want
subject.
to talk about, because what I kind
Yeah.
of want you to talk about is, one thing I talk a lot about in this show is I kind of like I like to kind of say like stigma exists. It's not as bad as everyone kind of thinks necessarily, but it does exist. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes that statement is true about racism, and sometimes it's obviously definitely not true. Um, you
Yeah.
know, Donald Trump, let's just leave it at that. And so I guess what I kind of want to hear from you, and you kind of talk about whatever kind of instance you want to, or even multiple, but like, we all know racism exists, but when you just kind of say that blanket statement, like racism exists, like it seems so nebulous and just like, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like non-specific. It's like, oh, like okay, and
Yeah.
for someone like me, like I have not experienced racism. I experienced some discrimination from my mental illness, but that's really the extent of my discrimination that I've experienced.
Right.
So can you tell us about a time that you felt significantly discriminated against, that maybe you faced racism head on? Maybe it was in a social situation, maybe it was even in a professional situation, like medical school or something similar.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about that incident first. So in lecture, it was mentioned, we were talking in class about a specific case, and the vignette read, a 32-year-old African American female, which ding ding, I think of myself at 32 years old, that is diagnosed. that has been diagnosed with sickle cell anemia comes into the emergency room complaining of pain. Now, the caveat is our professor then continues, without this being in the actual vignette, saying that the patient is on welfare and is possibly drug seeking. Now, with the vignette just blanketly saying this is a African American female that is already diagnosed with sickle cell anemia, knowing good and well during a sickle cell anemia crisis, those are painful.
Yeah.
it just it really like dug at my heart because I knew, and I've had this personal experience with my own doctor where I tell them I have pain and nothing is being done. I'm not drug seeking. The patient also probably that we were talking about in the vignette probably wasn't drug seeking. And yet we're making the assumption and telling all of these future physicians to make this same assumption that, oh, it's an African American female on welfare, they're probably drug seeking. Where we all know if it was anyone else that sickle cell anemia, crisis within sickle cell anemia is very painful and they probably do need pain meds.
Yeah.
So that really took a huge chunk of faith out of me within for the school within me. So then we all texted each other and we're like, "What did y'all feel some type of way about this comment? Because I feel a little hurt in my corner where I am right now in lecture." And so we all like took a breath and like talked to each other and like calmed each other down. But I couldn't let it go. So I definitely talked to the professor at the time and was like, honestly, I as someone that identifies as an African American female, the comments that were said about making the assumption that this patient is probably on welfare and is probably drug seeking was very, very disheartening. And I respect you as a professor, and I respect you as a physician and a person in general. But I know that I wouldn't be able to sleep tonight if I did not bring this up to you. And I feel personally disrespected with those comments that were said. And so he took it upon himself, which he asked me, and I was perfectly fine with bringing it up in class to have the conversation with the rest of the lecture hall. And many of my peers definitely, shrugged it along and said, and I quote, can we talk about this at a different time in a different lecture? And quote, I don't see the problem in this when he does this to every vignette. And that's when I became emotional, when I heard my other peers talking about this. Because mostly it just made me very upset that we're not looking at this person as a human, and we're trying to just like dust off the like, oh, it's fine, like whatever, it's just another vignette, like he's just talking about it. Whereas if we talked about any other patient, it wouldn't have made, these assumptions would not have been made and these comments would not have been made. So it was just very disheartening for me to hear it from my other peers. But yeah.
Well, I really do, though, commend you for speaking out. I remember I wasn't actually present when that happened. It was actually during my wedding. But I remember listening to that lecture on my drive back home and being, proud that you had the courage to say something. Because at the end of the day, it would have been much easier to just sit there and bite your tongue and internalize those sensations. But by speaking out, it at least opens the door for conversation. And, that professor who did make that comment, at the end of the day, he is still a beloved professor, and I didn't think he had any malicious intent by it, but it just was one of the biases maybe that he had. And I think by at least having these conversations, we're able to identify our biases. And I remember that just kind of ignited this whole, at least thought-provoking process for me. It's like, okay, well, what biases do I have, kind of thing? And it's like, what things do I immediately think about when I do see a vignette like, okay, patient comes in, headache, sensitive to light. Are they just, do they have a migraine, or do they just want the drugs, kind of thing? And like, what conclusions do we jump to so quickly when we hear those things in a potential vignette, or in the future when we potentially see someone in the emergency room or clinic, whatever? But even more basic than that, when a patient walks into our office, when they're a certain color skin, what things are popping into our mind? And I think the better that we can identify what, based off of our cultural experiences, like what conclusions do we jump to that are really inappropriate? So, I know it wasn't easy for you to speak out about that, but I really am very proud of you to do that. Thank you for speaking about your experiences in medical school and kind of an honest rendition of what it was like. Because medical school is so hard for everyone, but we talk and everything, but we don't have time to socialize, and we don't really have time to really sit down for a long period conversation like I guess me and you are doing now, and saying, how is this going for you? We're all freaking out like, I'm going to fail. And so, I didn't really realize, and, we were friendly, of course, during first year, and became better friends during second year. But like, I didn't know those kind of things were what other people were experiencing. I just kind of made the assumptions. I see, this person sits by this person, they must be friends with that person, and they're very good friends. So they're probably doing fine. I'm in my own head fucking freaking out the whole time. So another thing, though, I want to talk about, there's this kind of notion, and outside of just our own school, but really all medical school, and maybe even all graduate school, if we're even talking about lawyers or accountants, or I guess even jobs in like investment banking, really whatever, any kind of respected position. So, I remember listening to some podcasts when I was a pre-med student. I would read like every article online kind of thing. And I didn't have this happen to me, but other people happen this to, where it's like, Logan, you should not apply to medical school because you are a white male. That's, medical schools are not looking for white men necessarily anymore. You have to be such a superb applicant as comparison maybe to, just because like we hear these things like quotas all the time, right? Kind of thing. Mm-hmm, and I think that's really a bullshit notion, and I think it's really unfair to everyone. Because I think a good doctor is a good doctor. It doesn't matter their appearance or whatever. Right. A caring person is a quality of a good doctor. But right. Did you feel that kind of notion in medical school? And did you feel that kind of same pressure, quote unquote, additional pressure on yourself that you identified as when you were a high school student in that Christian school?
Well, when applying to medical school, I definitely knew that if I ever did get in, I knew I would, especially if it was a predominantly white school or class, that I would always have the perception of the school needed diversity, and this is why you're here. And so that was always in the back burner, the back of my mind, always making sure that I acted correctly. During the interview, I acted very, very proper, made sure that I had my best foot, or stuck my best foot forward, very polite, overly polite. And I wish I actually was more, outgoing and like more assertive and more myself, really, in those, because I knew that it was my past anxiety and my past experiences of being that only and always needing to prove my position here, and being the best because I have to be, and being the best because I know that if they ever were to accept another Black person at the school, then my performance here is going to make that much of a difference for the rest of the future students. And so I know that definitely carried with me, and I knew that if I just acted right, I would be able to get in. And I got in, and then that fear definitely carried along with me throughout first year, and then second year I kind of got a little more lax. Um, but yeah, definitely was a huge struggle, and like within myself, an internal struggle really, just to make sure that I was always on my P's and Q's and making sure that everyone knew that like I got it. I'm here. I'm
Yeah.
here to stay. Yeah, yeah.
Like I
So
earned my seat. It's not because of my skin.
right.
I'm a smart person, and
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, there
Right.
was a lot of things. You helped make those study guides that I used extensively throughout the first
Yeah.
2 years of medical school, and I probably would have flunked out if it wasn't for you and some of the contributions of some of your friends. So thank you for that.
You're
So
welcome.
we're coming up on 40 minutes. So where I kind of want to take this conversation now is I like to sort of end with some means of advice, in a sense.
Okay.
So I guess let's first talk to, I guess, maybe the majority listener. And what I guess, not, I shouldn't, okay, I phrased that wrong. Most of our country, I guess I don't even really know the census now, but, the majority of most things are white people, right? Or at least, I guess we
Right.
could say medical school. So I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people listening really appreciate your story and they want to help, but they don't know how. So, how can students like me, like students who fit more and more in, I guess, this racial majority of kind of medical school, and I know it's changing, but it is fact of what it is now, but how can we reach out and connect with students of color who might feel isolated? How can we approach these kind of topics being sensitive but also being helpful? I'm sure it's not as simple as like, how's it going and how is your blackness affecting your academic performance? Like it
Yeah.
just feels so awkward, and I would love for you to at least take some means of a stab to try to educate people in similar shoes that I was in.
Yeah. Okay, so first off, not making the assumption that every black person is the quote unquote token black person.
Mm-hmm.
So don't think that they know everyone else that is black's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think that they are talking for the entire realm or the entire race of being of black people. It is you are only getting their experience, just like this podcast is only getting my experience as being black in medical school. That is a huge, huge thing because people will sometimes come up randomly and just ask you questions like, so, your hair, how do you do this? Da 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 da. Like,
What do you think of Charleston, South
here's
Carolina?
right. And like, how do you feel growing up in the South? And how's racism and going on in the South? And da da da. And they always ask me these like very, very broad questions. And I'm like, I don't know. I live in Washington right now and I'm in medical school. Like, I'm worrying about school right now. Don't ask me about this. Um, but yeah, so just making sure that. Also, if you think that something sounds bad or
More like
awkward,
if you're
try
going
to
to
put
start a sentence with, this is going to sound racist, but.
you right, right. Don't ever ask that.
If you have that thought,
The only
just don't, yeah.
right, right. And make sure that the person that you're asking these questions to is someone that you feel comfortable with as well as they feel comfortable with you. So just because you talk to Sally or Allie Mae once ever in your life, and then you think that you can just ask them a question about something that's very personal, which is the realm of racism and being black, don't think that you have this right to ask. Um, Definitely build the relationship other than just, hey, this is my black friend. I need
Yeah.
you to be in their life. Like ask them about their family. Like just like me and you are, Logan. Like we are really good friends, which is why I'm so comfortable talking to you about this. You are more than welcome, and I will be more than happy to share my experiences and share what's been going on with me in my life with you. So if you don't feel comfortable telling that person that you're about to ask this very intrusive question, your deepest, darkest secret, don't ask them anything about being black or racism or whatever.
Okay.
Be comfortable with that person before you speak.
Well,
I'd
it's
also like
just go ahead.
I'd also like to say if you hear a comment from someone else that you feel like or that you see made a person of color uncomfortable, try to flip it and make sure that if you were in their position and they said the same thing but in opposite, wherever it refers to you, how would you feel? Um, Try to be an advocate for them.
Okay.
And in that case, I'll bring up a very simple comment or scenario. When we were doing the scrubbing activity, and this is when we put on a scrub cap and the mask and the gloves and all that good
So
stuff. We're
for the
learning the scrubbing
non-medical
technique.
listeners, this is like what you do before you enter a surgeon operating room. That's what we mean by scrubbing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. One of my peers that was wearing their hair in braids asked, not asked, but the instructor that was doing the uh, situation or the scrubbing technique lecture or clinic, I guess, said, I don't know what you're going to do with that. And then continued on with the lecture. Speaking about how she's going to put her hair in the scrub cap, like saying that just completely
Yeah. Like basically
dismissing
like you
also
should you can't be a surgeon with that hair.
yeah, pretty much like saying like, you handle that because I don't know what to even do or talk about or ask about with you. So I'm just not going to deal with you right now, and I'm just going to continue with my lesson because everyone else is a lot easier to deal with.
Yeah.
That is a very not traumatizing, but disheartening situation. And you're just like, I don't even know what to say. I don't even know what to do.
Yeah.
So, in that situation, it would have been great to have an advocate and be like, "Hey, that wasn't nice. Like, you could have said that a different way, or used a different tone, or offered a larger scrub cap to fit all of her braids in, or something. Just to be more
Yeah.
helpful for the
Or
patient or
just
for the
as simple
the
as like
student at
we
the
don't
time."
have that scrub cap today. In the future though, you would have to wear this sort of scrub cap, or this is how would you would accommodate that large hair or whatever, like
Exactly.
finding
Like,
solutions rather
great, this
than
longer hair.
yeah, rather than making that person feel excluded. So I guess last question
Exactly.
here, I kind of want to ask, now flipping your advice to, someone is listening to this podcast who is a person of color, who maybe is really identifying with your story and, hearing so many things that they have also experienced. So what advice would you want to give that person who maybe is in a high school where they feel very different than their peers? Maybe they're in medical school where they don't look like their peers. What would you tell that person?
I would tell them, do you, be you, always stick to who you are, and have a great support system, whether that's inside of the school or within your classmates or not. Make sure that you have that support system. Find a mentor that's in medicine. If you don't have one in your faculty, hence, PW. And if you can find advocates within your peers, keep them around you and keep them in your grasp because these are the people that are going to help you get through because you still have to make those connections within medical school and you have to make the friends and you have to be social, but you don't have to give your everything to them just to appease them because at the end of the day you have to be selfish when it comes to medical school, and that's talking to anybody, like anybody, no
Selfish
matter if
just
you're purple or
in
brown.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be selfish when it comes to medical school, and if that means that you do have to isolate yourself and only talk to people from back home or only talk to people that talk to your mentor or your friends back home or something like that to get it off your chest and to really see and feel at home, do that because the negative energy and the negativity of that sometimes can lead from being the only black girl or only black guy in the class is not good for your mental health at all.
Yeah.
And will only contribute to the anxiety that we all already have. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Mehalate, I mean, this was a really enlightening conversation. I think this was a very cool episode. It's one type of episode that I have never really done before, to be honest. I do, of course, have friends of color, but, I don't get to have these sort of conversations as frequently as I like. My wife is someone of color, and so she's educated me much more than I ever really knew about living as someone with a different colored skin. But it's almost one of those things, like, I think as you start to learn about a subject, you start to realize, the more you understand about a subject, I guess, when you realize how much you don't know and don't understand, that's when you really kind of have a grasp of experience. So I identify that I still have so much to learn and ways that I can improve my own biases and my own treatment of individuals of color, because it's going to make me a better physician. So I really enjoyed this conversation today. I hope we do another conversation, because I think there's a whole other realm of topics that we can talk about, whether that's racial topics or whatever, that I just think from your perspective would just be a very valuable opinion for people to hear.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Any last words of advice for our 3 people that tune in weekly? I'm just kidding, it's more than 3. It's like 5.
Be an advocate. Everybody's a human, so just be nice, bro. Just be nice. Be a nice human. Treat everyone the same, and I don't know why, but it's usually seen as harder than it is to do, than it is to say, but
it's so
just really
simple.
Just tune. It's so simple.
Yeah.
You can do it. It's very, very easy to do. So just be nice to everyone and everything will be fine.
Well, and it's like, although we have, the person in the highest office of the land who doesn't really seem to look at people as equally, there are people in our society, and there are people all over America, even in deep red states, that can treat people equally and don't have these kind of racist biases. And, on the other side of the coin, there's people that don't consider themselves at all racist. I don't consider myself at all racist, but I know I do have inherent biases that maybe I don't even fully understand. So the more you can think about and explore and have conversations with people that don't look like you, of course, like you talk about, don't ask like the first time you meet them kind of thing. Like you really have to make an effort to get to know the person rather than the skin tone kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was a great convo. I wish you the best fun in Hotlanta for a wedding,
Atlanta.
right? Sister's wedding.
Yeah, I am. Yep, I'm here for 2 weeks. It's gonna be the best 2 weeks ever.
Excellent. One last thing. I hope you loved your psychiatry rotation, and I think you should become a psychiatrist because you'd be awesome. No.
You will forever tell me this, huh?
Always. Yeah, we don't need more surgeons and OBGYNs. We need more well, we need more everything, but mostly psychiatrists, and you would kill it.
This is true.
All right, well, I am going to... My new puppy husky is, I think, probably tearing down my living room as we speak. I probably don't even have a television anymore. Definitely not the cord to the TV anymore because of this damn dog. But I love that thing. It's my best friend. Thanks again for tuning in for this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, I would greatly appreciate rating or telling your friends or whatever. Just spread it, because I don't like posting that much on Instagram. It's not that cool, and I believe in the word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell anyone who you think would appreciate hearing conversations about anything related to mental health. Also, if you have any questions for me or just topics that you think that I should cover, people that you think I should try to reach out to and get on the show, please reach out to me. I've had a few people reach out to me now from all over the world, actually. One person was from Iran. One person was from Chile asking me questions. So I'm going to have an entire show where I'm going to be reading those questions and answering them aloud. So the more questions that come to me, the better that episode's that's going to be. So, help yourself, people. All right. Hope you're doing well, and thanks again for tuning in.